event. Mr. Rashmi, Mr. Gotmare, I'd just like to inform you that we can go ahead with the framing, the chair's remark and the framing presentation, and then Dr. Mathur will give the welcome remarks. So first, I'd like to I would like Mr. Rashmi and Mr. Gotmare to take over. Just for everybody's information, Mr. R.R. Rashmi is a distinguished fellow at TERI, and he has been the Special Secretary of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change of the Government of India, and was a key member of the Indian delegation which negotiated the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And our second chair for the event is Mr. Shantanu Gotmare, who is currently heading Global Green Growth Institute's India office as the organization's country head, and he's also of the Indian Administrative Service, and he will be our second chair of the event. So over to you, Mr. Rashmi, and over to you, Mr. Gotmare.
Shally, let us request Dr. Mathur to, if he has already joined, we should invite him, because I can't see him here.
Yes, so his office said that there might be a slight delay, so we can shuffle the order.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So there we go then. A very good afternoon or good morning, depending on the place on the planet where we are situated. Welcome to this webinar, and it's a great moment for all of us. We are passing through tough times, but we have now entered a decisive phase of the battle against COVID pandemic, and as the governments are gradually trying to wind down the lockdowns, they are coming out with packages for revival of their economies. The packages are aimed at reviving major sectors which contribute to the GDP, so that the recovery process is fast and resources are targeted well. But whatever be the scale, in all cases, looks like these packages represent some additional investment, and in many cases, most of the cases, large investments that could play a major role in either giving a kickstart to the economy or restoring the growth pulse. India has also come out with its own version of the economic revival package, equivalent to nearly 285 billion US dollars just 2 days ago. And as we speak, the second tranche of the revival package is being disclosed by the finance minister. Yesterday, she talked about the micro, small, medium, and large industry and MSME sector. One of the questions that arises in this context is whether we can use this opportunity to also achieve environmental goals and nudge the business, the enterprises, and the industry, and the other sectors, major players, towards those activities which are green in nature. How can we ensure that the process of recovery is not only good for growth, but also for environment? The question is it possible to use the financial leverage implicit in many elements of the packages to use this for influencing the business and governance decisions? And what parameters could be used for this kind of indexing and facilitating better decisions? We did some analysis to understand if we can find a clue in this regard from the way economies behaved during the 2008 financial crisis. Results of this analysis will be presented by Shally to you in a few moments. But it appears that the 2008 experience, which was rooted in a purely financial crisis, does not give adequate guidance for the post-COVID challenge of greening the economy. The challenge for a green economy, as I said, in the post-COVID world, is to use these parameters for greening uh, in a way that the process is not only sustainable, but also equitable and socially acceptable in the long run. If we look at India's revival package, it's clear that it is primarily aimed at protecting the jobs and incomes of people employed in the small, unorganized sectors. The corporate and large sectors are not directly covered in the package so far, but many of them have already been covered by the liquidity relaxations provided by the RBI last month. The government is in discussion with many of the multilateral institutions for financing its development programs, as also some elements of the package. But it is difficult to foresee a situation where this could be contingent on environmental conditionalities. So, what is the answer? How can we take advantage of this package and yet help the businesses and the industry move forward on a path that is greener? Uh, to me, it looks like so far the package has addressed the liquidity issues for the business and the entrepreneurs. This is important. Yesterday, when the finance minister talked about MSME sector, I'm sure what she had in mind was that this sector is extremely important for the livelihood and also for the GDP of the country. After all, it contributes 30% of the GDP and 40% of our exports. But for making the economy resilient, inclusive, and at the same time green, it is important that we move beyond liquidity issues and start tackling the issues of reforms. Our experience at the time of framing the NDC under the Paris Agreement tells us that in the absence of clear market signals, the transitions in the systems do not take place on their own. And then there have to be policy interventions. The energy transition in India, for example, which was in a way facilitated by the NDC, has now picked up speed, and it's only because the government raised its ambitions substantially and pushed the market in that direction. So, and today the operating costs of renewable energy have fallen substantially. So the revival package of the government of India and many other countries, it does offer us an opportunity to nudge the planners, the stakeholders in the concerned sectors to start thinking in ways where we can add to the speed of greener activities and adopt practices, business practices, which help the economy as well as the environment. Uh, uh, to discuss these issues, we have a very large and excellent panel of speakers today. And I'll now request my co-chair, Mr. Shantanu Kotmare, to introduce the subject from his perspective, and then we will invite the panelists to give their contributions.
Thank you so much, sir, for introducing the topic here. So, since last about a month or so, when sitting at home, one is reading the economic sort of activities and upheaval which is happening, and it is true that to some extent the COVID has made the humankind to press this reset button, taking the cues from the nature. So, how should the green economic path look like? Is that it is the path that should definitely incentivize the government to decarbonize economies, which was always there, and should use this opportunity for faster reduction in the GHG emissions, while at the same time making sure that the growth or the benefits of this economic recovery reaches as many people as possible. But for that to be a green sort of recovery path, we have to also keep in mind that the COVID reconstruction as an opportunity has to be either cost neutral or higher growth or risk reducing. So, for example, in terms of the risk reducing, if the recovery path leads to some of the interventions that reduces the risk of such pandemics in the future, or the environmental risk, then also that becomes a worthwhile investment rather than just a higher growth, having only a higher growth lens on such investment. So in a capital constraint post-COVID scenario, definitely the budget constraint and optimizing this capital allocation would become important decision drivers. And in today we have amidst us the people who have been in the stellar leadership positions in MSMEs, in the schemes such as MGNREGA. We have Department of Economic Affairs people, as well as the multilateral and other organization representatives who jointly would like to uh, go forward based on, there is another dimension which was added by another our honorable prime minister regarding atmanirbharta, or self reliance and self sufficiency. So to a large extent India would also look at domestic manufacturing, sourcing more and more resources domestically, which means that manufacturing activity would increase, which means that it would have an impact on the way we consume the resources, the way we utilize the energy, and every other carbon footprint step that we take. So to add it to this is also the dimension of SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which India is supposed to, has committed itself to achieve in next up to 2030. And how do COVID impact that? So there are SDG commitments, there are NDC commitments, and then there are ongoing programs which were already running. For example, there is a commitment for every household to have drinking potable water by 2022, Har Nal Mein Jal Yojana, for which again MGNREGA would be one of the key uh, you know support program in terms of the source security, water source security. Yesterday's, just to give another example, in yesterday's intervention, for example, for MSME, there was talk about an equity infusion fund of 50,000 crore, uh, which is roughly $8 billion. And that is something in which, again, in a green recovery path or in a green growth path, can there be a daughter fund that is completely focused on greener economies? Because there is a talk of mother-daughter fund. So such are the ideas that we would like our panelists to deliberate upon, to talk upon. And to set this agenda, to take this forward, now we have, as per our program, we have Shelly now giving the framing presentation as well as the pointers from where we can take. Shelly, over to you.
Thank you, Shantanu. Thank you, Mr. Rashmi. May I please just request the IT to check if Dr. Mathur can get in? Apparently, the capacity is full. So, if it is possible. And Dr. Rita Pandey, are you able to hear me? Okay. So, this, I'll just go ahead. The presentation. So I hope all of you can see the presentation. Can somebody just confirm and whether they can see and hear me?
Yes, this is Shantanu Shelly. I think we can hear you and see the presentation.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we can see.
Okay. So, a discussion paper was already circulated to all of you, and a brief of that discussion paper as well. Some colleagues from TERI as well as the NIPFP, Dr. Rita Pandey is also a part of the panel discussion, and Shantanu from GGGI. We thought that there should be a discussion on greening of economic recovery in India, and so we kind of came out with this paper. So this is just to kind of serve as as a framing presentation. So in terms of the introduction, as many of us who are following discussions, policy discussions in India, day before yesterday, the Prime Minister of India announced a special economic package which aims at a self-reliant India, but while also integrating India with the rest of the world. And the package is to the tune of 20 lakh crores, which is about 10% of India's GDP, and is supposed to have 5 pillars, which is economy, infrastructure, systems, vibrant demography, and demand. So while most of the packages, and even so far what has been announced even yesterday, and perhaps while we are in the discussion, the finance minister is also announcing the same right now as well, is that they are more of the nature of short-term relief packages and not so much long-term revival and recovery packages. So, but what we have seen from international experience, especially from the 2000 and in past experience, from the 2008 economic crisis, which of course did not impact the world the way COVID-19 is impacting. Many countries came out with the idea of real green fiscal stimulus, and countries who did, for example, China, Korea, they did build up competency in certain environmental goods and services and went on to become market leader. So green fiscal stimulus package is also a policy tool which can be seen as a means to build competitiveness in areas which has also future market potential as well as the competitiveness. So this paper, I know, and you all have a copy of that, and we'll circulate it also post the event. It kind of reviews the past experience and also the current developments in India. We also, as a part of the short and very brief time frame exercise, we sent out a questionnaire to key stakeholders, largely who are part of TERI's Council for Business Sustainability, and of course this in a way would also mean that we were kind of targeting the converted corporates, but many of them did respond to the questionnaire, and so the largest chunk was from the corporate, followed by research and academia and MSMEs. So there was no conflicting viewpoints among the respondents, and most of them seem to agree that the present situation, COVID-19 situation, should be leveraged to promote the SDGs and the NDC commitments, as well as since international investors are becoming more conscious of ESG parameters, it is a good means to promote responsible business practices. And many of them felt that in any recovery and revival measures, greener industry should receive a stronger recognition and should have differential incentives. While most of the companies were still, kind of preferred self-reporting, while they felt that the system could be made more transparent, and of course, all the stakeholders were counting on the government, so the state has a very important role to play. And many stakeholders kind of were a little worried about the fact that stimulus packages that would be announced, like in past, would be more in a short-term time horizon rather than long-term, because many sectors will take a long-term to reach a reasonable capacity utilization. And in terms of new areas of investment, most of the respondents felt that there should be more investment in cold storage facilities for farm produce, locally sourced transport fuel, renewable energy project, resource efficiency, microgrids, and special economic zones which focus more on environmental goals. And MSMEs certainly came out as they should have a proper incentive package along with facilitation of IP-based resources, and they also demanded that there should be a special fund for greener MSMEs, and that current norms such as zero effect, zero defect, which are very much a part of the Make in India campaign, can be pushed in further. And because right now the adoption in MSMEs is very low, which is around 400 MSMEs amongst so many MSMEs that we have. And in terms of revenue collection, people just felt that there should be increase in taxes, especially in the luxury sector and on items which deteriorate health. And most importantly, on the policy front, policies at state and local level should be aligned with national level policies. So these are some of the key points that came out from this questionnaire. Then in terms of the recommendation of 5 pillars, this is just like, just to kind of put in some points. In terms of economy, greening of economic recovery can be seen as an opportunity to increase market competitiveness in environmental goods and services. And investment destinations, and India can be considered as an investment destination norm because more and more investors and even development agencies are becoming more conscious to responsible business conduct as well as environmental, social and governance related norms and revenues. So some revenues, there can be some revenue made available that would be free from the crash in world oil prices and the taxing of luxury goods and goods with negative externalities. And more investment can be pushed in priority sectors. So the Reserve Bank of India or the Central Banking Regulatory Institution of India already has priority sectors, which has several sectors related to environment, including renewable energy. So even the banking sector should more aggressively push investment in these priority sectors. In terms of infrastructure, this can be a good opportunity for technology upgradation as well as strengthening infrastructure at the local level, and especially for municipal corporations who are now also dealing with additional biomedical waste, which actually is mixed with municipal solid waste. And more infrastructure can take place for electric vehicles as well as public transport. In terms of system, existing decision-making process, including state budgeting and national budgeting process, can be transformed for SDG-linked mapping exercise for better coordination amongst agencies, as well as strengthen systems of certification such as zero effect and zero defect, eco-mark, and other international labels and standards. Sustainable public procurement can be also pushed in. On the demand side, this can be an opportunity to come up with vehicle scrappage programs with stimulus package, and this has happened in 2008. And that can be implemented to also phase out old and polluting cars and boost car sales. And awareness related to environmental goods and services should be increased. On the demographic front, there should be more focus on education, including SDG 12.8, as well as a focus on green scales, which is more around SDG 8. Now, in terms of expectations and rules, the objective of the webinar is to gather perspectives from various stakeholders and to also learn from the various esteemed panelists we have. And these discussions will be incorporated in a discussion paper, and the chairs can discuss more about it. Speakers, please stick to your time limit and keep your interventions to the point. And for the panel discussions, chairs will be directing specific question to panelists depending on the discussion. And meanwhile, for questions, we will keep a small question and answer session towards the end of the panel discussion. So please send your questions via chat. And depending on time available, select questions will be directed towards speakers towards the end of the panel discussion. And after the webinar, to all the participants, we'll be circulating a questionnaire also, so you can also provide your inputs through the questionnaire. And topics to be covered, this will be projected in your screen in the banner, and I will request the IT team to please project the banner on the screen. Over to you, chairs.
Shantanu, please go ahead. I think you can invite the speakers.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Shelly, for that brief presentation, which has set the expectation as well as which has very clearly brought out the relevant issues here. So again, to all the participants, you kindly use the chat room as much as possible so that it remains there. Now, as per the sequence, I'll be inviting the panelists, and I'll just read out the keynote speakers sequence. I'll be first inviting Mr. Ram Mohan Mishra, who is the Secretary NSC and former Special Secretary of MSME, followed by Mr. Stefan Conchius, who is the Commissioner for the 2030 Agenda, German Federal Environment Ministry. Then I would invite Mr. Kevin McKibble.
Shantanu, Dr. Mathur has joined. Sorry, he was able to get in the chat room.
Okay,
sorry.
Definitely, yes. And finally, I'd invite Ms. Henriette Fogman, who is the Counselor EU Delegation to India, But all this, let's before we said this, I would like to invite Dr. Mathur. Uh, Mathur sir has been at the, Terry's helm, and before that, I know him as the in the Bureau of Energy Efficiency person. Sir, it would be nice if you could set the tone of the keynote speaker, so that then after that I can start introducing one by one. Over to you, sir. Uh, is Ajay Mathur sir there? Actually, I think there is some issue about.
Okay. So I think we can,
Yeah, this tells us that we need to
yeah,
have
yeah. We
digital
can shuffle,
backbone
yeah, we can shuffle,
up
yes.
properly. That's the first thing that we need to really do in this post-COVID thing. So now it's my privilege to request Mr. Ram Mohan Mishra, the Secretary NCSC and former Special Secretary of MSME, to address this gathering. Mr. Mishra has over 30 years of experience as an Indian Administrative Service Officer, having worked in the field of general administration, mines and minerals, planning, banking and institutional finance, environment and forest, water resources, commerce and industry, and his latest assignment as the DC in the at the MSM Ministry. He is a law graduate who is Masters in Geography and has studied public finance at Maxwell School of Syracuse University. He was also CEO of a government company working for promoting and facilitating inclusive growth, entrepreneurship development, climate change adaptation, and sustainable development. I invite Sir to kindly give his keynote address. Sir, the only restriction is that it has to be 4 to 5 minutes brief. That's it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shantanu. First of all, let me compliment the presenters for their brief PPT, which I saw. I think it has been very thorough work done in terms of setting the tone for the discussion. The topic is very relevant because, as Mr. Rashmi was saying, when the investments are happening, that is the right time to get that window of opportunity and chip in. So while I think FM made that announcement yesterday, and then I think Shantanu again was mentioning whether in this fund of funds, there is space for greening. So from my memory, in fact, because I was a party to framing up all these proposals, there is ample scope for getting that slot there. And mention was also made of zero defect scheme. That also has been substantially altered and restructured to make it very big actually. And not only that, lean manufacturing to reduce wastage, and then there was an effort with the KFW collaboration for greening of the energy supply also for MSMEs. Now the question here is, first of all, the focus for all of us who are talking about this has to be whether right kind of knowledge about what we are talking about is available to all the stakeholders, whether they are in policy or corporate world or in the MSME sector or in the consumer field, because the knowledge of the costs and benefits which are associated with greening or non-greening are the ones which are going to drive the consumer behavior and also going to drive the investor behavior. And this is where I think uh, apart from what we are doing post-COVID through this rehabilitation package and the restructuring of the economy and so forth, the suggestion which I would like to make it that there are a lot of routine investments which are happening in public domain and also through multilateral institutions, whether through UNEP or through there's several other efforts which are ongoing, and there's so much of treasure which is already there in the system. So the effort, I think, some more incremental investment is required to put all these pieces together and set up a body of knowledge. And I think TERI has always taken a very lead kind of role in this, and then I would encourage that leadership role which TERI has been performing. We're coming out with some sort of mission where all these investments which are so to say scattered as I saw them, then if they are integrated together, and first of all knowledge is created, knowledge pool is created, and also resources are brought in. I won't talk about allocation only because not only one person is involved or only government is involved. Resources are mobilized around this so that knowledge is not only created, it is also disseminated. And this is where a lot of work is needed on, first of all, changing the consumer behavior. As I think Shantanu was mentioning, that a lot of things are being reset. When the things are being reset, we can rewrite the genetic code, rewrite the design of the entire thing, which is going to be set again. So one, investment in the consumer behavior, so that what kind of products they are demanding. Second is on the supply side and on the facilitation side. So there are a lot of government schemes which have been going on, not only what is being announced now, but a lot of ongoing investments are there, and there's need for calibration of those investments to bring them a little more close to the greening of the economy, and it is possible. So this is where I would encourage that we, as a body of people, we need to allocate more energy to this process. Where when these departmental schemes are there, all these standing finance committee meetings or all those meetings are there, where those concrete ideas which are going to calibrate the action on the part of those concerned public agencies or for private investors or impact investors or banks and financial institutions. So ultimately, as I see, it boils down to cost benefit. So when I do certain thing or I do not do certain things, what is the cost for me and what is the benefit for me? Now this has to be not only at the macro level we need to talk about it, but we need to decentralize this discussion. It has to go to the microeconomic zones actually, a particular community or maybe block or a cluster. What is the cost for them and benefit for them in being green and not being green? And this is where I think when we're competing in terms of economic action, when non-green is competing with green and getting over it, we have to see what is that incremental investment needed to nudge, as somebody was mentioning, to further persuade those stakeholders to go closer to the green path. And the viability gap filling. There used to be a scheme of Department of Economic Affairs was upon a time through Planning Commission. There was a question of viability gap funding. And this is where we need to create a pool of resources. That for this to compete, the green to compete with non-green, what is that gap which is required for this to compete, to be filled, and then gravitate more and more resources towards it. It is possible, but a lot of action, as I say, is needed in terms of getting into the nitty-gritty of the analysis of these investments, the way they happen. Most of it will be driven by markets because that's how it is. But the market behavior also can be tweaked by bringing some of those investments in the marketplace. And investments are required right across, right from innovation to knowledge creation, to knowledge dissemination, to skilling, to reskilling. A lot of people are going back to their villages now. The question is, can we reskill them so that they can lean on natural resources which are there, come out with products and services which can be brought to the market and can be bought and serviced there. And this Atmanirbhar thing, I think we are going to buy more and more from ourselves. And that's why if we promote this natural ecosystem centric MSMEs, those agro-rural kind of MSMEs, which are natural ecosystem-centric MSMEs, and gravitate more and more resources from that what is Campa funds, and then there are a lot of green funds available which are there here and there, but we need to have a very, very thorough, very, very detailed action plan, not only in the point of public agencies, but also private sector, and put all this together. I am sure when a lot of things are being reset, a lot of things are automatically getting restructured. Particular mention I would like to make is of Ayurveda. That's a green product. A lot of herbal products are there. We all know that there are a lot of solutions for COVID into this Ayurvedic thing, and we need to aggressively invest in this so that there's scope for economics there, but also health, also for well-being. Quite a lot of, I was just looking at it, quite a lot of those goals which are there in SDG, those 17, can be fulfilled if we gravitate closer to the natural ecosystem-centric MSMEs. I think it's a very vast subject, and I'm sure today's discussion, as has been said, will throw up more points and more issues. And I look forward to whatever is said here by everyone. And I would like to benefit from whatever is the conclusion of this. We as a nation, we as an international community, I think this is an opportunity for us to go back to nature, to not only exploit it for our production system as a resource, but also to look after it as sustainable resource, because that is where the ultimate well-being lies. I think I have already taken 1.5 minutes more. I'll stop here, but I would like to continue to contribute to this very, very great kind of initiative which all of you have taken. My special thanks to Mr. Rashmi and Shantanu for inviting me here to this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You have always been passionate about the green sort of economy. And as you have rightly said, probably it's time that the climate change hire. Somebody said that climate change should hire the PR agency of COVID, because that has generated a lot of action. So next keynote speaker here now is Mr. Stephen Contius, who is the head of Division of United Nations Post 2015 Agenda and Cooperation with Developing and Newly Industrialized Countries at the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Building and Nuclear Safety in Berlin. His previous assignments in the Environment Ministry include legal affairs, prevention of air pollution, G7 and G8 cooperation, and project financing. When he was continuously involved in the establishment of bilateral environment and climate change dialogues with Brazil, China, India, and other countries, as well as has served as the German chief negotiator for World Summit on Sustainable Development, the UN Conference on Sustainable Development, and as German co-negotiator for the 2030 agenda for SDGs. So he's an important SDG speaker on this particular forum. I now invite Stephen Contius to kindly give his keynote address. Over to you, Stephen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at this event. Your initiative is highly appreciated. It is very important to reach out to each other on this very important subject. Obviously, we have to join forces. There are these two challenges in the same time: the fight against the virus and the fight against the climate crisis. Financial resources which are available, public and private, should be used in both fights. Of course, first priority is the survival and health of citizens. But while mastering the immediate mid and long-term social, economic, and financial impacts of the crisis, we should take into account the goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda and of the Paris Agreement. Stimulus packages should bring us forward regarding the modernization of our economies, regarding social progress, and regarding decarbonization. The stimulus measures should be socially, economically, and ecologically sustainable. The EU and Germany both have the objective of a climate neutral European Union and also Germany by 2050. The European Commission has proposed a European Green Deal, which we very much welcome from the German side. And the European Commission will subsequently carry out an impact assessment that also takes into account economic and social aspects. To work on this and to come to an agreement that is acceptable to all members of the European Union will be an essential element of the recovery in Europe. And I'm very glad that we have the EU representative in Delhi with us. In the same spirit, we in Germany look at our cooperation with partner countries. We are looking into possibilities to use existing projects of bilateral cooperation for some greening recovery measures. This applies, for instance, to the projects of the International Climate Initiative of the German Environment Ministry. And we are also very appreciative of the work of the United Nations Alliance called PAGE, in which UNDP, the ILO, UNEP and others are working together on greening the economy. One of their partner countries, as you might know, is India. The UN Alliance page has decided to offer advice also on green recovery measures. And the German Environment Ministry is among the main financial contributors and supporting this additional option of what PAGE is offering. For the same reason, my ministry is funding also the initiative Go for SDGs, which is started by UNEP. They will, in the second half of this year, become operational, working from UNEP's regional offices and cooperating with UNDP, the ILO, the World Economic Forum, and the International Confederation of Trade Unions. In Germany and elsewhere, mainstream companies are putting pressure on governments so that they work on a green recovery. And so that they avoid the lock-in of outdated technologies while working on the recovery. I think this is very encouraging, and I'm very curious to learn more about recent discussions and developments in India, also concerning, for instance, the business community. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to this very important discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. One of the most important interventions that you have made is about not getting locked into some technology which is not environmental friendly while the recovery is happening. And that is something which is definitely one of the key sort of suggestions that we would take forward from here. Our next keynote speaker is Mr. Gavin McGillivray, who is the head of the UK Department for International Development in India. He has been the head of UK DFID office in India since June 2017. Gavin was previously head of DFID's office in Burma since June 2013, and before that was based in DFID's London office, where he headed DFID's Private Sector Development, Global Funds and Development Finance Institutions Department and International Finance Institutions Department. He was also the UK Director on boards of Gavi and United, and responsible for DFID's oversight of CDC Group PLC and PIDG. He has managed long-term agricultural sector development programs in Bolivia, Honduras, Colombia, and the Caribbean. And in the middle of these assignments, has spent 8 years in London with the international corporate finance house Campbell Lutyens, of which he is an executive director. Now I invite Mr. Gavin to kindly give his keynote address.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join. Congratulations to TERI for organising this event, and congratulations to Shaili and your co-authors for your excellent discussion paper. I very much liked the emphasis in your discussion paper on recovery measures being sensitive to environmental sustainability, along with fulfilling the objectives of social justice and economic growth. I think many of us have seen that the crisis has laid bare societal as well as economic vulnerability and shown how intimately the two are linked. So we are here, I think, in this webinar, not just talking about economic recovery, but a holistic recovery in which environmental, social justice and equity are crucial and interlinked factors. The discussion paper and the presentation was full of excellent propositions. I'm just going to comment on one theme, if I may, mentioned in the discussion paper, but not, I think, fully developed. So on page 9 of the discussion paper, there is a sentence, a top-down approach will not be prudent and will hurt the India growth story more than it will help. And yet I would observe that nearly all of the propositions in the paper are, in fact, top-down propositions to be implemented mostly by government or government bodies. And in my preparation for this event, I was reading around, and I find similarly that most of the ideas, virtually all of the ideas about greening the recovery come from a top-down approach. They come from government, they come from academia, they come from think tanks, consultancies, business leaders, federations of corporates. And very few ideas on greening the recovery come from those who are most devastatingly affected by the crisis. The farmers and their families who are fearful of venturing into the fields to harvest their crops or to plant. The migrants trapped in cities without work, far from their villages, or the slum dwellers living in such dense concentrations that social distancing is a practical impossibility. But these people have lived experience of how pollution, how damage to the natural environment, how climate change, and now how the COVID crisis affects their economies, their personal economies, their livelihoods, and their lives. And they have made, over the years, the adjustments to cope with flooding, to cope with intense heat, to cope with a different and more varied monsoon. They have formed amongst themselves the community bodies that run the soup kitchens, that check in on those trapped in their dwellings. They have experience, which I think is very rich. And I want here to mention somebody who I very much admire and I've had the privilege of working with for 20 years now, and that is Sheila Patel, one of the founders of Spark, who has been working closely with the urban poor for many, many years. In an recent video clip, she said, the most important contribution that global institutions can make is to transform the process by which solutions are looked at. I thought that was a very interesting insight. How can we transform the process by which solutions are looked at? I think we need to ask ourselves, who is in the room in this debate about greening the recovery? Who are we listening to? Are those at the what we like to describe as the bottom, the informal sector, the migrants, the landers, labourers? Are they sufficiently well represented in today's webinar? And if they were, how could they be useful? And I would suggest that the answer to that question is to listen to them, because unless we give them a chance to express their ideas, unless we listen, we won't know. But one obvious example is we are all finding in this COVID crisis how it's very difficult to find out what's going on. It's very difficult to find out on the spread of the infection itself, the number of cases, the fatality, but it's also difficult to find out who is receiving the help that government and others are trying to distribute and who is being left out. Now, communities know this. Communities know who is most in need of help, the village panchayats, the slum dwellers associations. And I think there are opportunities, and we should create opportunities to link informal information sourcing to the formal statistical and planning processes to make sure that we are ground truthing our ideas for greening the recovery and our progress in implementing it. So one of my propositions is that we need proactively to create pathways to listen to the knowledge and ideas from everyday people. And the second proposition that I'll just spend a minute or two talking about is I think we need to be more innovative in turning ideas for the green recovery into actionable propositions, because a great many of the recovery schemes being announced and implemented at the moment depend on somebody being able to apply to them or put forward a project proposal or put forward an application to receive the concessional loan, the subsidy, the tax credit. And these applications, these proposals, they don't happen on their own accord. We all know how difficult it is to find well-structured project proposals. And I think that the dependence of many, many schemes on formal applications, on formal project proposals, is an inbuilt source of inequity, because those at what we call the bottom of the pyramid are less able to put these proposals together in the way that formal institutions require. So what I would suggest that as a central tenet of our green recovery planning and action, we should proactively foster innovation in project and policy formulation. And it should be one of our aims to proactively encourage and include ideas from the informal sector and to link these with the formal sector sources of finance and support. I'd like to go on, but I've run out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gavin. In fact, it's one of the important pillars of green growth is equity, and listening to the ground is one of the key pillars of this equity principle. So going forward, now in this particular segment, the last keynote speaker is Ms. Henriette Bergman. Henriette is Environment, Climate and Energy Counselor in the European Union delegation to India based in New Delhi. She is responsible for cooperation between the EU and India in these areas in the area of urbanization and smart cities. She has created India-EU Water Partnership, the India Resource Efficiency Initiative, the India-EU Clean Energy and Climate Partnership, including initiatives to support offshore wind energy efficiency, smart grids, and the solar parks program. She's a Master of Science in Chemical and Environmental Engineering from the Technical University of Copenhagen. Henriette, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear friends and colleagues. Of course, there are no words that can really express how severe a situation we are facing right now in the entire world. Some parts of the world in Europe, where I come from, are slowly starting to open up societies and the economy again, but others are still in fully fledged or even emerging crisis. I saw this situation illustrated with a cartoon of a boxing match where the world is about to knock out coronavirus. But outside the ring stands a much larger and more threatening opponent, climate change, reminding us that what seems now unsurmountable changes in our lifestyle can be much more severe in the future if we don't act. It's clear that all politicians across the world will be asked by their citizens to make sure that we recover from the COVID crisis. This is rightly the first priority. However, we can do it in two different ways. We can go back to what we did before and throw a lot of money into the old economy, or we can be smart and combine this with the necessity to move to a green economy. Europe sees this crucial moment in time, therefore, also as a huge opportunity. In December 2019, just before the crisis, the European Union adopted our new policy framework for the development of Europe. It's called the Green Deal. The Green Deal is our growth strategy to overcome the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation and to transform the European Union into a more modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy, where there are no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050, where economic growth is decoupled from resource use, where no person and no place is left behind, and thereby ensuring what we call a just transition. The Green Deal provides a roadmap with actions to boost the efficient use of resources by moving to a clean circular economy, to restore biodiversity, and to cut pollution to zero. The EU will be climate neutral in 2050. To do this, we proposed the European climate law, turning the political commitment into a legal obligation and a trigger for investment. The climate law also addresses the necessities the necessary steps to get to the 2050 targets. The European Commission will soon propose a new EU target for 2030 emission reductions. Reaching these targets will require action by all sectors of our economy, including investing in environmentally friendly technologies, supporting industries to innovate, rolling out cleaner, cheaper, and healthier forms of private and public transport, decarbonizing the energy sector, ensuring buildings are more energy efficient, and working with international partners to improve global environmental standards. I think we can safely say that this is the most comprehensive green policy framework that any continent ever has adopted. And I'm quite optimistic about it because really, if we can't make it with this, there's no way we can make it at all. So I think it is really a make or break situation for all of us. Europe is now developing its green recovery plan. And instead of abandoning these ideas, we intend to put more emphasis on them and emerge with a stronger and greener economy. We know that the green sector provides more jobs and better jobs than the conventional sectors, and we intend to use this opportunity to allow our economy to change gear and speed up the green transition. Some of the areas we are looking at include tax reform, fiscal reforms that stimulate a higher share, for example, of secondary raw materials in production, direct investments in low carbon economy sectors, for example, public transport, housing and services, government programs for accelerated construction of green buildings, green public procurement in public budgets. The EU and India are already cooperating for years on fighting climate change, greening the economy, and a sustainable modernization of our society. So we have a really good basis to also work together on this. In the most recent EU-India summit, we have established several EU-India partnerships, as it was already mentioned by Shantanu. We've established an EU-India Clean Energy and Climate Partnership, under which we work with India on concrete initiatives on the ground, for example, in relation to energy efficiency in buildings, offshore wind, the solar parks program, rooftop solar program, smart grids and power market design, energy storage, and cooling, including the coal change and district cooling. We've established the India-EU Water Partnership, where we cooperate closely on the Clean Ganga initiative. We've produced India's first ever comprehensive river basin management plan for the Tapi Basin, and we are supporting the development of a policy for reuse of treated wastewater, among many other issues. The EU and India's partnership for smart and sustainable urbanization, where we aim to contribute to Indian flagship programs such as Swachh Bharat, the Smart Cities Mission, Amrut, by, among others, city-to-city pairings, metropolitan labs, and involvement of Indian cities in the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate Action. Finally, we cooperate with India in the area of resource and circular economy already under the EU Resource Efficiency Initiative. This initiative has created effective policy partnerships with Niti Aayog and MOEFCC at the central level and Goa and Telangana at the state level. And I would like to thank also TERI for being a partner in this program, and of course GIZ as the implementing partner. Concrete outputs of this program have been India's resource efficiency strategy, the draft national resource efficiency policy, and a strategy for fostering resource efficiency and circular economy in Goa. So we have all these existing partnerships, and we're working very closely with all kinds of stakeholders on the ground. And we are right now looking into all our work programs for all these partnerships and trying to identify both activities that can support COVID response and also COVID green recovery activities. So, for example, under the water partnership, we are looking into how can we facilitate water reuse, maybe not at the fully optimal cleanliness, but a cleanliness that would allow for much more hand washing in poor areas, for example. We are looking into how can we make sure that the circular economy can really be stimulated in this post-COVID response and not being overtaken by other types of economic activities. So we are looking carefully into all that, and that's why I'm extremely happy that this webinar is happening and that we get this opportunity to really think jointly with you and with our partners in Europe and the EU member states to see how can we all of us help stimulate these activities, because I really feel we stand at a crossroad where we can go two ways and one will not be a good way. So I hope that we can jointly take the good way. And thank you very much for sparking life in this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Henriette. Like you mentioned that EU has committed a lot in terms of even the legal framework, and that is something which is quite important in terms of going forward. And I mean, your concluding remarks that we are in it together is very important. Just like COVID, in fact, climate change is a common crisis. We all face it, and it's not as if we at one part of the world can just deal with it and the others can just look at it. It's just like COVID. It would impact all of us and is impacting all of us. So taking a deep dive from this segment, now we would get into the next areas where we are talking about the thematic addresses, where we have called the experts from some of the areas and some of the key things where we see that the green recovery would happen or is already has started happening. My first speaker in this particular segment is Rohit Kumar, sir, who is the Joint Secretary in Ministry of Rural Development. And he's right now he's handling probably one of the most important programs for the benefit transfers at the grassroots that Kevin was referring to, which is MGNREGA. And he is heading MGNREGA team inside the Ministry of Rural Development. Sir was earlier in Rajasthan, and he has done tremendous work in terms of water conservation and getting a lot of innovative practices into MGNREGA there as well. And he brings a lot of rich experience from the field to the policy making at the national level here. Sir, I would request you to kindly give your intervention with a specific focus on MGNREGA, as well as how do you see this Ministry of Rural Development's thinking process on taking the initiatives at the grassroots level. Just to remind you, the time limit is 4 to 5 minutes. Over to you, sir. Rohit Kumar.
Thank you so much, Shantanu, for inviting me to this webinar and giving me the opportunity to talk to all of you and to listen to all of you. And thanks to TERI for conducting this webinar. As all of us are aware that it's a really tough time for not only our country, but the entire world because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the biggest problem what the people are facing is employment, especially in the rural areas. And here is a program, Mahatma Gandhi NREGA, which guarantees at least 100 days of unskilled employment to all those persons, all those households, whosoever volunteers for it in the rural areas. So these programs, as on today, in this crisis, is really helping, especially the poor people from the rural areas. And I will just tell you the quantum. You cannot imagine every day now, 24 million, we are providing works, we are offering works to 24 million people each day in the rural areas. So you can think of the volume of the program and the kind of help which is much needed to the rural poor. We are trying to give them as a wage employment. We are offering 24 million per day. And for this year, already we have intended to generate around 2.8 billion percentage. And the average annual, releases from Government of India, last year it had been 10 billion US dollar. So this year it will be again somewhere to 10 billion US dollar or a little more. So this is the quantum of funds and quantum of people getting wage employment under this program, and which is really benefiting all the rural poor in this COVID pandemic time. Having said that, this program has tremendous potential of greening of the economy recovery, which is the theme of this webinar, greening of economic recovery in India. Because my 63% of the expenditure of say around 10 billion US dollar per year, 63% goes for natural resource management, which includes soil and water conservation measures, which includes afforestation, which includes horticulture, and which includes a lot of agriculture and allied activities, which ultimately like farm pond, check dams, trenches, wells, which ultimately going to add to the natural resource management. So around roughly we are spending 6.3 billion US dollar per year only on natural resource management, which is really helping. And and this will be a great help for the long run also. And in addition to it, we are also major partner, Shantanu told in his initial remarks, in the Jal Shakti mission, the Jal Shakti Abhiyan, which was the water and soil conservation mega program at the behest of our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi ji, last year. And Mahatma Gandhi NREGA was a major contributory to this program. And now again, Jal Jeevan Mission, which is we have to, provide drinking water to every doorstep in next 5 years. So under this program also, for the water source sustainability, will be the major contributor. And under this, in the next 4 to 5 years, we will be spending around 10 to 12 billion US dollar on water source sustainability. So this program is not only helping the poor for wage employment, but also helping in generation of durable assets, water conservation assets, lot of NRM assets, natural resource management assets, and also helping in agri and allied activities like lining of canal, desilting of canal, farm ponds, wells, check dams, and we are doing adopting the risk to value approach. And in 14,000 villages, we have already done the GIS planning also, the risk to value GIS planning, and based on that we are taking up all the water conservation assets. So in nutshell, basically this program is really helpful, and I am very happy to share you. And we are also taking care of the migrant laborers which are coming, from the city to the rural areas. Under the Act, we are providing them job card as well as work. And last but not the least, under the PM Garib Kalyan package, the wage rate has also been revised from 182 rupees on an average to 202 rupees. And it depends, it varies from state to state. It varies from rupees 13 to 34. So we are committed to the goal of our Honorable Prime Minister, which recently he has set for us, the self-reliance, by giving wage employment, by creating durable assets, by creating NRM assets, by creating agriculture and allied activity assets, so that the people, they become self-reliant, not only in terms of their livelihood, but also in terms of their running the economy. So since it's just 4 to 5 minutes time, these were the few points I wanted to share. And any reaction or anything from your side, I am there to respond. Thank you so much, Shantanu.
Thank you so much for joining us here, sir, and for actually telling us something about the I mean, everyone almost in India knows about MGNREGA program and its reach. But in terms of the resilience building for the grassroots people, whatever the focus that you have on NRM is amazing. And we hope that, in the green economic recovery, whatever is the projects that you are undertaking, would definitely build the assets that would be environmentally sustainable and friendly. Specifically, the focus on NRM is something which is very welcome, and this forum actually is there also to thank you and also to encourage you to keep investing into this particular project. Going forward, sir, now we are taking our next speaker in this thematic address is Bhanu Pratap Yadav, sir, who is the Joint Secretary, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. And he's looking after policies and programs relating to the wind power and small hydro in the country and the national level. Till a few days back, he was also head of IREDA, which is one of the largest NBFCs, government NBFCs, which invests in the renewable energy sector. Now over to Bhanu Pratap Yadav, sir, for his intervention.
Thank you, Shantanu. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible and visible as well.
Okay. Thanks. One of the positive fallouts of the COVID crisis, in fact, I'll call this as an opportunity, that even the illiterate person is able to appreciate the far cleaner climate, and not only in terms of the much cleaner air and the trees, but much cleaner rivers, including Ganges in Delhi. Everybody appreciates this now. So this has become a mainstay. So next time these things, the pollution will come. I think everybody will ask, why we are again going back to same old system of polluted air, polluted water, and all. One of the important contributors to the pollution and the air which we breathe, which is actually much more dangerous than corona, is our energy system. And with our international commitments against to mitigate the climate change, I think Renewable Energy Ministry has been developing, trying to support all the programs. And last 2 or 3 years have been quite exciting. The renewable, all sorts of renewables, whether it is wind power or solar power, has become almost acceptable to all the utilities. They have become quite competitive, and that's one major change which I have seen in the last 3 years. Now most of the utilities are actually preferring the renewable power. Also, response from the Government of India, Ministry of Home Affairs, has been that the renewable systems was supported. The construction of renewable projects was started as the first sector from 20th. The first partial lockdown was lifted. That day itself, any renewable project, the construction could begin. Besides, the ministry has been supporting the renewable projects. It insisted on must-run status, which some of the states were not willing because of the reduced demand. It advised that instead of physical bills by the generators to discoms, you could submit the bills through e-mechanism, or online bills could be submitted. We also requested the Ministry of Shipping that in case the goods are stuck at the ports, we are getting a lot of stuff from China and other international markets. The damage, the warpage and other damage could be minimized, so that support was given. So there has been a significant amount of, and if we compare the pure traditional power sector vis-a-vis the renewable power sector, I think the damage to the renewable sector has been lesser. Besides, we heard of the recovery package, the economic package, which was announced, part of which was announced yesterday. There is a big money, about 90,000 crores to be given through PFC and REC as receivables from discoms. So that's a big, big relief to the sector. And we are also seeing a lot of requests from the corporate sector to provide just the renewable power. They do not want power from thermal sources. The inclination is that they want power from renewable energy. So there is a lot of demand side traction for the sector. We have taken a challenge to based on the directions from Honorable Prime Minister, that we've taken a challenge to do the reforms, major reforms as much as possible. So the Electricity Act, the amendment to Electricity Act, all the bottlenecks which were there, it's already in public domain and likely to be finalized shortly. I think the number of significant reforms are coming. Meanwhile, the trust reposed by the financiers, including the large investment community from the international community, from the international, large FIAs and pension funds, has been great, including during the time of COVID. Our bidding continued. I mean, one of the major issues, is that the SECI continued its bidding activity, and the tariffs which we received during this COVID lockdown were more competitive than even earlier. We came out with new products like round the clock RE power and other stuff, and the tariffs were really competitive. So there's a lot of positive traction in the market, and number of manufacturers are actually thinking in a very concrete way to shift their manufacturing base to India. So India is both as a fairly big market for RE, and also with our very competent manpower. We are in fact thinking of bringing out a new product in terms of export of RE services. So I think in view of the limited time, these are the highlights which I thought I would share with a very learned audience. And yeah, I hope the international commitments in terms of reduction of our carbon intensity, the GDP's carbon intensity, we will reach all those targets which we committed. And yeah, that's it. Thank you, Shantanu.
Thank you so much for joining us. So like you said, the type of tariffs that has been received above for 24/7 power, I think it was ₹3.59 on the levelized basis, and that is something which is quite great in this era. Plus, yesterday there was an announcement of 90,000 crore package towards this segment as well. Yes. MNRE, I mean, is one of the key ministries in terms of, just like MGNREGA protects our natural resources, and one of the key interventions for the energy security, it will be MNRE going forward as we look towards e-mobility or towards the clean and green energy, and huge amount of mitigation efforts that needs to happen. So, sir, now we are taking the the step towards the listening the industry voices and their expectations from how the package needs to be made greener. And in that sequence, I first would like to invite Mrs. Rita Roy Chaudhary, who is the Assistant Secretary General and Head of Environment, Climate Change, Water, Sanitation, Renewable Energy, Power, Coal in FICCI. And she has 23 years of professional experience and has led FICCI in the environment, climate change, and renewable energy domains. She is the nodal point for India Sanitation Coalition and a member of its steering committee, and also FICCI's focal point and convener for two task forces of the International Solar Alliance, the Global Leadership Task Force of Corporates for Innovation and the Global Task Force of Foundations. Rita, over to you for your interventions in the expectations of FICCI in the recovery package and greening of this recovery package.
Thank you, Shantanu. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. I'd first like to thank TERI and GGGI for inviting FICCI to be part of this very interesting topic and a very interesting panel today. And it is indeed, I think, a very opportune time to discuss the greening of the economic recovery for India. So I would really like to position my thoughts from the way that business and industry would look at things. And having heard all the esteemed panelists before me, I think there are a lot of thoughts that can be brought here in convergence to build the thought process around greening the economic recovery for India. So, the COVID-19 pandemic has really pushed all the organizations to reinvent the way they operate, and everyone's trying to find a new equilibrium. But we know that every crisis presents an opportunity, and therefore this is the right time, especially for business and industry, to evaluate how they can build business resilience for the future to global or local crises. In fact, it really demands now even more that everyone recalibrate their businesses, their long-term strategies to build in the risk-related metrics that would help them to shield against any kind of future shocks in the system and adapt very quickly. Therefore, I think it is really an imperative to look at long-term resilience from the lens of the SDGs particularly, and transition to becoming SDG compatible for the future. So it'll be very important when we talk about economic recovery to really see what kind of policy direction can be provided to help organizations become SDG compatible. We know that several big companies are already mapping their business outcomes and deliverables against the SDGs, but we really need to widen this even more. And this shift towards business resilience would require that the transition is green, that the whole circular economy approach has to be part of this strategic shift, and that government and business work together to make this happen. We would need to see that policy formulation for the future needs to incentivize even more resource use efficiency, recovery, recycling, reuse, in order to make businesses even more resilient to the future. We're already seeing the direct impact. Some of this is good, some of this is bad in terms of the environmental parameters that this current crisis is really having. We're seeing the impact on air pollution, on waste management, on mobility, on clean energy, on biodiversity, and various other areas. And the new normal, which will continue to have social distancing as a key norm, would really impact the way people work, the way they live and they travel. This will have impact on many aspects of the economy and would require policy formulation to be revisited in all these spheres. So it will really be important to see what impact the new norms would have on how people commute and travel. What would be the impact on public transportation, for instance, whether demand for travel itself would go down substantially as more and more organizations shift to working from home culture, whether the demand for non-motorized solutions will come up. Will this lead India to think of the need for more non-motorized solutions, the need to ramp up non-motorized infrastructure to support the citizens to look at such options as well? Also how waste would be collected and segregated because of social distancing, because of hygiene issues, how, the masks which will land up in the solid waste chain would be managed, how the contribution of clean energy projects would move forward in the next 1 year, and what is the impact that we are seeing on all of these areas would be very, very important. Now, the phrase green in India is really seen in the context of sustainable development and inclusive economic growth, including poverty eradication. Because when we talk of green, when we talk of sustainable development, we also look at all our developmental priorities and how to sync those priorities with the need to address environment and social parameters. So I think going forward, it'll be even more important that the government endeavors to address all these three dimensions in a much more balanced manner, that we see a higher priority to sustainable development matrix in the policy, in all aspects of policy formulation. While we are seeing this already in many areas, I think the transition to green recovery will really require action on multiple fronts. And I think there are really 6 areas that we can look at in terms of this transition. First, I would say is technology and innovation. And we know that, technology and innovation would really lie at the heart of any transition towards a green economic recovery. Complementary measures should be directed at encouraging research collaborations between private and public sectors. This is a good time to really step up the effort on research and development and, cutting edge technologies, fostering innovation in resource intensive sectors, increasing the adoption of clean energy sources, and most importantly, adopting innovative business models to scale up decentralized, distributed, and digitalized technology interventions would be very, very important pivots for moving towards a sustainable future. And all of these we know are intrinsically linked to several SDGs. The second pillar I really feel is sustainable finance. I think financing India's goals for inclusive and sustainable growth at the time of COVID-19 crisis requires really the mobilization of innovative finance, additional low-cost long-term capital. We are seeing businesses reeling under the pressure of this COVID crisis. it is even more important that there isn't the setback on the whole momentum that sustainable finance has built up over the years. And therefore, it's even more important that we bring the discussion on sustainable finance at the center of the economic recovery discussion, because it is important that we see how sustainable finance can really help to plug the gap in areas where the crisis is having a deep setback on particularly sustainable projects, green projects, so to say. In fact, FICCI's recent publication with the City of London Corporation that we released earlier in the year actually suggests directions for policymakers to reduce the investment barriers to supercharge India's green finance sector. This report, which is available in the public domain, it's titled Untapped Potential Supercharging Green Finance in India. It really talks about the recommendations on how to drive the green finance sector forward. And it emphasizes on the structural barriers to investment and how government could address these structural barriers to help channel finance, particularly from capital markets, to unlock capital for green projects in the area of renewable energy, sustainable transport, waste management, and all of these areas. The third, I think, area that we need to look at is how do we continue to mainstream sustainability in decision making, particularly for business and industry. The corporate sector, we know, will be the most important stakeholder in the path towards transitioning to a green growth pathway, and it will help to derive efficiencies in the goals and targets that governments also set out in these spheres. We know that leading businesses are at the forefront of sustainability and are taking groundbreaking initiatives. They're investing in innovation and measures to stay ahead of the curve. For example, I'll give you an example of the extended producer responsibility obligation. For example, by the end of some of the last year, in fact, in 2019, 22 FMCG companies, global companies, took a pledge to reduce the plastic footprint and move towards circular economy. We also know companies in the e-commerce industry have quickly shifted towards limiting the use of plastics in packaging mailers, ensuring recyclability of the bubble bags, etc. So there are already measures underway like this, but what we need is really this to cut across in terms of enabling businesses to mainstream sustainability in their long-term business goals. We also know that businesses across the world, including in India, are increasingly adopting a supplier code of conduct. And since this is applicable to suppliers of big businesses, it significantly contributes towards greening the value chain and inclusive development as well. We know that the Honorable Prime Minister emphasized in his speech on the 12th of May the need to build a self-reliant India and thereby support a strong domestic supply chain that not only fuels growth for the Indian economy, but also contributes to the global supply chain. So this will be a very, very opportune moment for India to really look at this crisis as an opportunity and build in measures to enable greening of the supply chain. The fourth area, I think, is green skills and green entrepreneurship. I think that's an area where a lot of the effort and push can be given. It is a green job is one that will help bring about a transition to environmentally sustainable forms of production and consumption. And therefore, it is even more important that we reduce the mismatch between the demand and supply of requisite skill sets that are required in various areas, be it energy, water, waste, pollution, name it, in sustainable transport, etc. So currently, we know that green business sector generates about 20 lakh jobs. This, of course, does not include waste management because waste management is largely also in the unorganized sector. And it is estimated that about 2 crore additional jobs, apart from waste management, will be created by 2030 due to a strategic shift of India towards sustainable development. So this is a very important area. As FICCI, we are continuously trying to build the industry connect to create a government industry interface and partnership with stakeholders from industry, from academia, in order to help this demand and supply mismatch to be addressed. The fifth one I would talk about is consumer awareness. It is very important that consumers become the core target audience to drive the imperative towards adoption of environment-friendly choices in their purchase decisions, and therefore to help shift preferences of consumers towards less carbon-intensive products. This will, of course, there has been a push in the past through various eco-labeling programs. We've seen the success of the BEE star-rated programs, but this needs to be widened even more and can only be done through supporting policy measures and incentives to move towards greener products. This will also require, the right kind of labeling and certification programs that can enable informed consumer choices and behavior. The last one that I would reflect on is on market development. While we talk about sustainable alternatives, innovative, resource-efficient technological solutions, I think the challenge lies in trying to scale these up and see replication across the country. So for any innovation to really go to market, and we need innovative business models, but we also need policy direction towards encouraging the offtake of any kind of byproducts, end products that are generated from a circular economy sort of a pathway. The Prime Minister spoke of demand as a key pillar in the economic package. Any policy measure, I think, towards a sustainable alternative will therefore need to look first at measures that would help to trigger demand in the first place. So it's very important when we talk of any of these areas, be it clean energy, be it waste management, sustainable mobility, any such area which is promoting the sustainable development goals needs to look at demand creation and therefore market development. So we need policy measures to help create markets for all these important outcomes of environment and low carbon pathways. So I think I will stop there, Shantanu. These are the key points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita, for really framing it up in terms of the both supply side interventions, the support interventions in terms of technology and innovation, and the demand side interventions that we need to do to sort of shift them towards the green economy, and presenting the important voice of industry here. I think Seema from CII was here, but then she needed to log off for another presentation. So we would move to the panel discussion, which is the sort of the last segment of this particular webinar. Here we have, I believe, Abhishek Acharya, Mr. Chandrabhushan, Rita Pandeji, Dr. Ashish Chaturvedi, and Anubha Prasad, as well as Mr. Bhaskar Tripathi. So this is the sort of discussion where we hear the voices from people who are actually either delivering the program, such as Ashish in the field, or looking at how the things should move and having that intellectual input here. So let's start with Chandrabhushan, who is the President and CEO of International Forum for Environmental Sustainability and Technology, iForest. Chandrabhushan has been writing quite prolifically about the green recovery and how it should take place. So rather than giving introduction here, let's hear from him about what he wants to say in this panel discussion. Chandrabhushan, please start this panel discussion.
Thank you, Shantanu. Can you hear me?
Yes, Chandrabhushan, I can hear you. Great.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening, everyone. And I want to thank Shally and other colleagues for inviting me to this interesting discussion. I think most people have covered largely the issue that needs to be developed and incorporated in a green recovery package. But let me point out a few issues which can help Shally's paper. I think the first thing it is important to understand is that we will require multiple stimulus package. I want to take you back to history. The New Deal in the US, which Roosevelt, and I think we should compare this economic crisis caused by COVID to that of Great Depression. The similarities are quite uncanny there. So it was a 6 years of economic stimulus package from 1933 to 1939. So the first thing we need to understand is one economic stimulus package is not going to solve our problem. The economic damage that COVID has caused will require long-term intervention and multiple stimulus packages. So anyone who wants to look at a green stimulus package should think in long term, not in terms of first one or two stimulus package. First one or two stimulus package will be to revive demand and to make sure that majority of people are getting back to the job. I don't think we should get worried about that. Uh, so that's the first point I want to make, and I think the paper should incorporate that we are in for a long haul. It is not about one or two economic package that we should worry about. My second point is that I am very worried about language around a stimulus package. While the Prime Minister did say that we will promote local while integrating with global, the language that is emerging is be vocal about local. I'm very worried about it simply because this binary of local versus global is more damaging, and we have experienced it for 5 decades before 1991. And I think it would be a great mistake we will do again by creating this binary of local and global. There are advantages of global. I remember I have seen industries in late 1980s and early 1990s, the kind of technology we used and the kind of environmental damage and pollution that used to happen. So we need globalization for technology, for knowledge, for values. And wherever there is advantage. So the second point is this Atmanirbharta, whatever self-reliant that Prime Minister is talking about, has to be nuanced. It cannot be nationalization. It cannot be promote only local and reject global. It will be much more damage to environment than we imagine. Local is not always good for environment. I think that's very important to recognize. The last point I want to make is that I don't think that a stimulus package is about program and projects, and also not about old language of sustainable finance, sustainable job, greening. I think the language will have to change. Those were the language of pre-COVID, when we thought that nothing is going to affect us. Market is supreme. It's a cycle. We are going to get hit by this cycle once. We will recover again. We have done that historically. We will do it again. I think COVID has taught us that's not what it is. My market is far more fragile, based on very weak foundation, and there needs to be fundamental change in economics and economy if we want to have so-called a green planet and address issue like climate change. So again, my last point is that any stimulus package should target fundamental changes that is required. It is not about setting up a automobile scrapping facility. Okay, those are very peripheral issue. If we are looking at greening of economy, if we are looking at addressing issue like climate change, biodiversity, water challenges that this country and rest of the world faces, then we have to think about a stimulus package. And let me again reiterate, a long haul stimulus package that leads to fundamental changes in agriculture practices, in our energy system, the way we are building our cities, and many other issues. I don't need to reiterate those points. The last point is, and it is important, and I'm saying this from the perspective of climate change and climate change negotiations. COVID has taught us that every country is on its own. In fact, the level of cooperation during COVID has been abysmally poor. Okay, sending few medicine, those are only the thing that has happened. In fact, countries have undercut each other. on basic health infrastructure, which many media is not reporting, but people know those kind of undercutting has happened in testing technology, in PPEs, in many areas. And for all of us who have been negotiating climate change, this entire notion that there will be this grand coalition which will solve climate change, we have to fundamentally rethink that position again. When the push will come to shove, I think countries will be asked to be on their own. And that is something I think, when Prime Minister talked about self-reliant, I think that was one of the fundamental experience that India has had during this period on testing technology, which came out on this issue. So let me end 4 points, and let me congratulate TERI for doing a good report and a good discussion. And we should take this agenda forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chandrabhushan. Straight as an arrow is what I can describe his intervention. But let's also hear what one of the key think tanks, which is the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, thinks about greening the economy. So I would invite Dr. Rita Pandey, who is the professor at the NIPFP, and with her area of research in environmental economics, to make her intervention. Dr. Pandey. Is Dr. Rita Pandey there? Okay, in that case, I think there is some connectivity issue. So let's move on and hear from Abhishek. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, there seems to be some connectivity issue there. I would now invite Abhishek Acharya to kindly make his intervention. Abhishek is the Director in Ministry of Economic Affairs, and which is at the helm of affairs at this point in terms of the design of the package. Abhishek, over to you.
Hello, thank you. Am I audible here?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you very much for having me in this webinar, first of all. And thanks to the webinar, I'm able to take the liberty of taking my mask off, as you can see very well. Let me address the issues from a very focused perspective of the COVID-19, post-COVID-19 situation and the climate actions that the government of India has been taking and will be taking. So it is worthy to mention that India has been maintaining the position on the climate action, especially from our nationally determined contribution, that it is based on the best effort basis. And we have been maintaining the position that it requires enabling finance and technology for both mitigation and adaptation objectives. However, we must also underline the situation that the international climate community has not been able to come out with any concrete outcome, especially with the finance and the market-based institutions for climate change. And the volatilities on the oil price fluctuations and the volatilities that we are witnessing post-COVID-19 situation has put a big question mark on the entire aspect. So while addressing the climate change will be a very important challenge for India, it is worthy to note that in the post-COVID pandemic situation, the entire structure may need to be revisited. And as we can see from the outcome of the pandemic, we have seen a very high possibility of low spiral on the economy, and and its timelines on the low carbon scenario might need to be revisited when the situations might be conducive. So I also again reiterate the idea that greening, the idea of green development comes with the three objectives of SDG, inclusive economic growth, and poverty alleviation. So all these imperatives have to be taken into consideration when we proceed further in our climate actions as well as the international climate negotiations. So I would like to finish over here and keeping the entire discussion very brief. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Abhishek. Let's hear from Dr. Ashish Chaturvedi, who is the Director of Climate Change at GIZ, about his interventions in terms of how the recovery package and greening the whole economy should look like. Ashish?
Yeah, hi, Shantanu, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, brilliant. Thanks very much to TERI as well as GGGI for inviting me. Well, of course, it's been a long sort of panel, and I feel sorry for the attendees, but it's good that we actually get to talk to each other and hear each other, and hopefully the attendees can actually sort of ask some questions as well. Well, I just want to make a couple of very quick points. I think Chandrabhushan's made the right appeal that we should, if you're thinking about greening and sort of stimulus packages, we have to think about the long haul. Of course, there can be a lot of nervousness around the fact that, of course, the immediate sort of responses would not cover the green issues so prominently, but given the kind of misery and the sort of despair that you see on the streets, I think it's not a surprise. However, I think even the immediate recovery measures, there are possibilities. And I think MGNREGA offers one possibility, and how to tweak MGNREGA sort of implementation possibilities to the current situation and to the current crisis. I can think of a couple of examples already, right? So for instance, thinking about how to manage the stubble using MGNREGA labor. Is that a possibility? So all this stubble burning, which causes all this damage to air quality, can we actually manage the stubble in situ using MGNREGA labor? Can we actually start thinking about an urban employment guarantee scheme, which is actually managing labor, which is providing labor for material recovery facilities, which are sort of handling huge quantities of waste? But I think there will be lots of other ideas. So I think if we put our heads together, I think this paper should also mention a few such ideas, which are actually talking about immediate recovery and how immediate recovery can actually be linked to greening certain aspects and creating jobs at the same time. We need huge numbers of people on the ground to deal with waste management, of course, sustainable agriculture, and also sort of, well, linking it to the targets of the government of India, right? So for the government of India has taken a target of 26 million hectares to sort of arrest land degradation, right? And I think that's something that can eminently be doable using labor from either MGNREGA or other programs. Similarly, the 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent sort of sequestration in forests. Can you actually use labor, which is can be sort of labor in the short term to sort of address some of those sort of targets, which are internationally and nationally very important? So that's the one part. The other part that I think is equally important when you actually start thinking about a stimulus package is what is the overall framework? And I think some people preceding me have alluded to it, but I think it's important. And I think even this paper should present, that would be my remark and final remark on this paper, that how do you bring a certain kind of framework and sort of assess the actions of the government or of make suggestions of what can be done in the future using that framework. So for instance, this entire framework of sustainable development and SDGs, but I think that kind of also needs to look at how politically feasible are certain sort of suggestions. So what kind of alliances, transformative alliances, whatever alliances we're talking about domestically as well as internationally, can push a particular agenda? Where do we prioritize certain difficult things which we haven't been able to crack thus far, which cut across different government departments? And I wrote recently about One Health, this entire concept of the health of ecosystems, of human beings, as well as of animals. How do you bring this concept together? And I think there, of course, there has to be collaboration between Ministry of Environment, as well as Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, as well as other ministries, including the Ministry of Finance. So how do you bring these different tricky issues of cross ministerial collaboration and tackle them in the short term, well, medium term and long term, I would rather say. And then, of course, there are fundamental principles that you would actually need to adhere to when you start thinking about sort of recovery. No? So are you sort of adhering to the Pareto principle? So you basically sort of not harming sort of most people without, well, sort of you make most people better off without harming sort of others. You look at the precautionary principle, and then fundamental principles of participation, decentralization, and local ownership. So I think if we have this framework, then it can be applied to different actions in the short, medium, and long term, and then sort of kind of assess. So it can be used to assess sort of what is happening currently, and then make proposals for the future as well. So I would stop at this stage, and thanks very much for having me on the panel.
Thanks, Ashish. That's I think a thought that is very welcome is to think of health as a holistically in terms of environmental health, in terms of the human health and the animal health, and getting it together at the forefront of the climate change discussion to think about it. And that's also something of a framework that one can sort of allude to when we are developing this paper further. So now let's have the intervention of Dr. Rita Pandey, who can tell us about how these public finance measures should be there to sort of give a fillip to the green economic recovery, and how can we factor in the economic services here. Dr. Pandey, please. Shelly, can you please check if...
Dr. Rita, your mic is mute. You will have to unmute it. Dr. Rita, were you able to unmute your mic? There seems to be some issue. Rita, we cannot hear you. I see you have unmuted your mic, but we cannot hear you. Shantanu, there seems to be a problem with Rita's audio connection, I think. So I will ask her to check again. Meanwhile, you can go to the next speaker, please.
Okay, please get it checked so that we can close it quickly, because we are already running out of time. So I would now invite Mr. Bhaskar Tripathi, who is the principal correspondent of India Spent, to make his interventions about the green recovery path. Bhaskar.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. Am I audible?
Yes, Bhaskar, you are. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Great, yeah. So since I'm a journalist reporting on energy, environment, and climate change, most of my ideas come from my reporting experiences. So I think the ideas that I would probably share will come from my stories, and they will have implications about rural economy, jobs, energy access, and environment. So these are the topics that I want to cover. So right now we're enjoying the clean environment induced by COVID-19 lockdown, but there are also analyses which have said that India's CO2 emissions have gone down after a really long time, and that's great. But this can change soon, and we know that from 2008 crisis, that right after it, when the enter in the recovery mode, the emissions from power and construction sector increased by many folds, even surpassing the pre-2008 levels. So I think now we know that also the nature of fossil fuel is also very fragile, and I think India is somewhat strategically placed at a right spot right now, because it has the opportunity in terms of renewables, and that mission actually has a lot to offer to not only for the energy sector, but to a broad spectrum of issues, which also includes job mainly. So International Labour Organization has shown that, like, if 40% of India's electricity comes from renewables, by 2030, the country could probably add 3 million jobs. And this will more than offset the jobs that India will lose in the process of scaling down the carbon-intensive and resource-intensive industries. So these jobs can also be extremely helpful for rural India, but there is a fear that rural workers are probably not equipped or are not able to tap into these jobs. And there are several reasons. One is lack of training. So I think the first part can be addressed about the training can be addressed by already ongoing schemes that are there. For example, Surya Mitra program, which looks at training workforce for the green energy jobs. And I think scaling that up can really help in scenario where now we know that most of the workers have gone back to rural areas. So that could be one. The second thing is that how to turn these green energy jobs into good jobs with better contracts, with better benefits. So I think most of the rural, so I was reading a couple of reports, and most of the renewable energy employers say that unskilled workers who lack technical and soft skills are the problem, because the organizations are not able to offer them full-time positions. So can the training centers which are there across India, most of them are facilitated by Indian government, help fix this problem? Can these center and their modules be improved? Because industries also complain that most of the training modules are not aligned with what is exactly needed on the work site. So that is one. Other actions, I think also that in the same aspect, that private sector lenders, private sector leaders and government together probably can build capacity among unskilled and semi-skilled workers to ensure sustainability of renewable energy projects and provide opportunities to rural communities. I think this can be one action. And I think also that the more thought is needed in terms of the government official should also like look for creating more public training programs to prepare the poor and less educated people, especially semi-skilled and unskilled, for employment in the green energy sector, because there are a lot of opportunities there. Especially can like programs like MGNREGA, I just want to throw it to the panel, like can programs like MGNREGA in some manner be linked with green infrastructure in rural areas? Because see, in my reportings, I've come across several examples. For example, I visited a site in a village in Kanpur Dehat where women were given products of distributed solar, and it was fascinating to see how these women now then turn those applied
I can't hear anything. Is that only me?
No, even I can't hear. Suddenly there is no audio.
Okay, I think yeah. So this is the technology challenge that as we move to the post-COVID, but we'll have to fix this as well as we move towards more virtual work from home and other things. So we'll move on, and now I would hello. Yeah, so I would like to now invite Anubha Prasad, who is the National Coordinator for the Partnership on Green Economy page, which is the UNEP's program, along with UNDP, UNITAR, and UNIDO, which strives to put inclusion, gender equity, and sustainability at the heart of economic policy making. Anubha, over to you and about your intervention.
Thanks, Shantanu, and thanks, TERI and GGGI for putting this up together. I'm not sure what else remains to be spoken about. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes,
yes,
Anubha,
you are.
I can hear you.
Please go ahead.
Yes, okay, all right. So, however, Shelley gave me a brief that I should, and I also take this opportunity to thank Stephen Contius, who specifically mentioned PAGE, this being an initiative of 5 UN agencies for putting sustainability at the heart of economic policy making. I have a training as a banker, MSME banker, because I was a general manager in SIDBI before this. And I've been heading the sustainability vertical in SIDBI when I was in SIDBI for a couple of years. So first of all, the first point that I'd like to make is that let us make a clear distinction between the relief measures and the long-term recovery measures. So the relief measures are kind of targeted at bringing the economy from where it started, the downturn from where it started. So arresting that, and the recovery measures would go a long way in boosting the long-term prospects of the economy. So how to bring green into that scheme of things? That's an important question. So from the MSME point of view, whatever has been announced yesterday, most of it is driven through credit intervention as well as the liquidity infusion. So the credit interventions, including the MSME definition. So MSME definition was pending for more than 5 years. This enhancement in MSME limit. So that was pending for more than 5 years. So it is not exactly linked to the COVID crisis as such. However, there are certain measures like, we spoke about the equity fund, 50,000 crore equity fund being made available through funds of funds. So therein, the role of daughter funds, which are green oriented in terms of green innovations. So there, if the risk capital can be provided for these kind of ventures, so special risk funding mechanism under the FOF mechanism, that would be a good thing to start with. Under MSMEs, there are certain challenges which have been thrown by this crisis. So the Honorable PM's address 2 days back, which gave a clarion call for local. So I don't think it is a clarion call for going back to the pre-91 days. Rather, it is when we see the millions of migrant workers walking on the roads. So it is more about creating the local employment opportunities. So we have to think about how can we create the local employment opportunities which are green and sustainable. So can we do something like incentivizing sustainable cold chains, or incentivizing waste, including biomedical waste and the plastic, which is the plastic pollution has gone up many folds by this crisis. Then, of course, the circularity. As in my experience as a banker, so we could lead a very strong resource efficiency program amongst MSME, which was credit driven. However, the crux there was that MSMEs should get a credit which is incentivized, which is concessional. Without that, even if you make the business case, because this is the time where the priorities are going to shift towards sustenance rather than towards greening. So unless until you make, even the business case cannot lead this change. So unless until you have the concessional kinds of funding mechanisms for MSME sector, they will not come forward for resource efficiency or circularity. That's one very important thing that we should consider. The government boost, the fifth pillar that the PM announced a couple of days back was a demand. So when we talk about the demand, the government is a very important component of that demand. So demand side, can we think of sustainable infrastructure? Like there are about 39,000 primary healthcare centers in India, which are the first points of contact between the people in rural areas and the health services. So can we think in terms of solarizing those primary healthcare centers? That would boost demand, whereas at the same time, the greening mandate would be there. So these kind of things, again, government underlined the importance of public procurement by doing away with the global tender mechanism for up to 200 crore tenders, procurements. So pushing sustainable public procurement would be another very important area wherein sustainability can be fostered. So these are a few points we can consider while advocating the greening of the economic recovery process in India.
Thank you so much, Anuga. I think what you have been mentioning is about the way we fundamentally think about in globalization we thought about integrating things. So is it the time to sort of make independent pockets where probably there is more of self-reliance in terms of energy security, in terms of the business opportunities. That could be another fundamental shift that Chandrabhushan had mentioned. It's just a thought process. So now we would have our I think there is some problem in Dr. Pandey's side. So I would request Mr. Pankaj Sindhwani, who is the Chief Business Officer at Tata Cleantech Capital, to make his intervention, and followed by that, we will have the concluding remarks from Dr. Ajay Mathur. Over to you, Pankaj. Pankaj, I think we can't hear you. Can you please recheck?
Shantanu, I've got a couple of messages about electricity and some kind of a problem.
Yes, but I can see Pankaj there, just like I can see Dr. Pandey, but I can't hear them. So if there is technology glitch that we can fix, it's okay. Otherwise, we can move on to Dr. Mathur.
Yeah, that was Bhaskar. Sorry, Bhaskar was the one who's lost because of the power failure. Although I don't know how his name is still there. Okay. Mr. Sindhwani?
No, even
Yeah, I think there seems to be some similar audio issue from his end.
yeah, Pankaj and Dr. Rita are facing that. So I think then in that case, we will have the concluding remarks from the DG TERI, Dr. Ajay Mathur. He had a meeting with the Secretary Power then, and then that's why he had to excuse himself for a while. But sir, it would be nice to hear from you about how the things can come together, because there has been quite divergent views from looking at the grassroots to making the fundamental shift in the terms of how we do the business, to about to Abhishek saying that the climate finance and the climate intervention, even at the global negotiation stage, will have to factor in the COVID imperative. So all these have been very different aspects of the same problem we are trying to look, which is how do we green the recovery post COVID. In the short term, the recovery package that Anuba had mentioned, just to look at it, and in the long term, how do we make sure that there are fundamental shifts in terms of how we do the business, how we manage the supply chains, how we maintain the sustainability, and of course, look at the population and people who are at the center stage of all this. Over to you, sir.
Shantanu, many thanks. Shirley, many thanks. I apologize that I was not able to join you in the beginning. That was a very different, there is also a technological challenge. I kept joining in and it said there are more than 100 people, you can't join. Then I joined in. I was pulled out for some time for another meeting, but I had the great privilege of listening to most of you. As I listened to the various suggestions, I thought there are three underlying themes which need to be captured. The first is that very, very clearly, jobs, sustainable livelihoods, and economic growth is at the heart of this government's economic policy and possibly of every government's economic policy. That's the first thing I'd like to leave you with. And it's something that has been captured by many, many people. I think we need to remember that. The second point that I think is important, Shantanu, and you had alluded to it, is that there is, in this COVID pandemic, there is work needed for relief, to give sustenance to people, that they can live their lives. So the grain that is being provided, the wage support that is being provided is really about relief. It's making sure that people live. Then there is recovery, so that, and that's largely what the RBI has been doing, making sure that businesses continue to function. But beyond that, there is economic stimulus. And we saw some parts of that economic stimulus in the package that was announced. I'm sure that as more details become available on how these would work, we would have a better idea. Because these have the potential for locking in the growth path for the future. So this is the second point that I'd like to leave you with, that there are relief packages, there are recovery packages, there are economic stimulus packages. Each of them has a different role. I think we should be careful about what we want in each one of them. The third point that I'd like to leave you with is, and this is somewhat contrary to what I heard, there is very, very clearly, there has been a drop in demand for energy. Now, the place where I disagree with some of the speakers is that some of this demand growth, the negative demand growth, is sticky. See, whenever we have had a decline in demand, after some time it rises again, and typically it rises at more or less the same rate of growth as it did earlier. So, you have got Z-shaped, a series of inverted lightning curves. Do we expect the same thing this time? I ask you, how many of you are working from home, and how many of you in the years ahead, not days ahead, in the years ahead will do a substantial part of your work from home? We have learned to do so. This obviously has implications for transport energy. It has implications for space conditioning in buildings. TCS, for example, announced that by 2025, 75% of its workers will be working from home. We also have learned to see outside and see the sky, to see the stars. In other words, the personal understanding that a clean sky is possible has happened. It is also clear that this has happened at a huge economic cost to us. I think what people will start asking now, and in fact have started asking, is, happened even today, can this be continued? Can we do it at an acceptable economic cost? This is where the public pressure becomes political. Changing the kinds of fuels that we use in industry, changing the kinds of transportation fuels, changing, I think it was Chandbhushan who was mentioning the kinds of ways that we look at managing, or was it Rita, managing the burning of agricultural waste. All of these are means that I think there is a greater public interest and therefore a political interest to solve. The short point I want to leave you with, that the demand tomorrow will not be the same as the demand yesterday. Will the demand grow? Of course it will. India is an energy deficient country, but it will grow at a much slower rate. What does that mean? That means that we will have a much longer time than the 2026, 2027, 2028 that all of us have predicted, that our current capacity would reach its limits. It will probably go into 2030. We may actually see electricity growth rates at such slow rates that the fall in demand that has occurred for coal may increase so slowly that it may actually never reach the levels that it did in May 2018. Possible. Again, what I'd like to leave you with is that we are looking at a very different demand future tomorrow than we did yesterday. What does this mean? As I have spoken to experts, I've spoken to industry, I've spoken to financial institutions. One of the key things that everybody seems to be focusing on is I see greater uncertainty in the future. And greater uncertainty, what does it mean in my terms, in my investment terms? It means I want to minimize my operating costs. I'm willing to spend a little more on capital. And it's not as if it doesn't happen. You saw that happen with the star-labeled appliances. People were willing to pay a higher amount of capital costs to have lower operating costs. What does low operating cost in energy mean? It means a preference for renewables. We are already at a situation where solar electricity is the cheapest electricity when the sun is shining. And I think we are on the cusp of a future. If the SECI results, the tender results, if you see those, we are on the cusp of round-the-clock prices of renewables plus a storage, which may be less than that of coal. All of this suggests to us that we may have a future that is greener than we had in the past. This comes now centrally to the issue of the economic stimulus. And that, I think, was one of the reasons why we had a huge, not a huge, but we did have difference in opinions. The difference of opinions, I think, is healthy because it points out that there are differences of opinion. You know, the economic stimulus is what matters. The economic stimulus will, the way it is designed to be implemented, will lock in particular choices for the future. So, for example, when we say the MSME sector, supposing the MSME sector is, it says that this money, which is the guarantees, which is the credit, will be there for people who set up charging stations, or electric charging stations for vehicles. You've got a lock-in for electric vehicles in that case. Supposing it is said that this will be for the manufacture and application of batteries, whether in cars or in renewables, you've got a lock-in. So it is crucial as to how the economic stimulus is used to, on the one hand, make economic growth happen, but on the other hand, to create jobs and, more important, sustainable livelihoods. I think we need to make the analytical point. We need to be analysis, and then we need to make the point that the jobs that are created, for example, the jobs created in the charging stations, are sustainable jobs. They will last a lot longer than jobs created elsewhere. They are also, by definition, new and additional jobs. Charging stations don't exist. The jobs that are created there are truly new and additional jobs. I think if we are able to create the analytical concepts that these kinds of interventions create jobs, create sustainable livelihoods, and create economic growth, we could have a green recovery, and a green recovery that's locked in. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Shantanu, many thanks to you and GGGI for enabling this conversation. We look forward to putting together the thoughts that we have got from various people into a document. We will do a series of webinars, a series of documents on how we move into a greener future. Many, many thanks again, and a very good evening to all of you. Shantanu, is that the end?
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, you have succinctly put it together and has given a clear sort of indication about the next steps. Shelly, over to you in terms of the next steps, and then probably we can wind it up because it's already 6:22.
Yeah, Shavik there? Shavik, would you like to propose the vote of thanks? And then after Shavik, chairs can then summarize and end the event, then, please.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shelly. So it's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the honorable speakers and the delegates for your participation. The discussion and the deliberations has been extremely enriching, value-adding, and very relevant. The keynote addresses by Mr. Ram, Mr. Stephen, Mr. Kevin, and Ms. Henry has helped in strengthened understanding of the emerging strategies that can make recovery sustainable and how deeper engagements and partnerships can be instrumental in overcoming the challenges. The thematic addresses and the panel discussions have helped strengthen our understanding of the sectoral and industrial priorities, how greening recovery will help in ensuring that there are future development pathways that are in sync with the sustainable development goals. I'm extremely thankful to Dr. Mathur, Director General TERI, for your closing remarks and also your overall guidance, valuable feedback, and encouragement in undertaking this exercise. I sincerely thank Mr. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow TERI, Mr. Shantanu Gotmare, Head GGGI, India for chairing today's session and summarizing the salient points of today's discussions. At the same time, I'm grateful to them and Dr. Ghosh for helping us sowing and nurturing the idea as well as providing valuable feedback on the background document. I would also take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to all the authors for preparing the discussion paper in really a short span of time. Thank you so much, Shelley, for today's presentation and your hard work, including the research and the successful coordination. Thank you so much, Asta, for your outreach initiatives and inviting our media friends, and Arup for his team to connect with businesses and consolidating their views. At the same time, my sincere thanks to all my colleagues, particularly Mr. Billy, Mr. John, and Veer for all the hard work and support for making this webinar a grand success. Thanks again and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry that we were not able to get Dr. Rita Pandey and hear her. I'm sorry we could not get Pankaj Sindwani. Bhaskar was interrupted in the middle. I hope that we can get their inputs as well. So please, I'm requesting, please, colleagues, if you could send us something, we would be very happy to do an interaction, write down what you have to say.
Sir, just to add to what DG TERI has said, I also wanted to say that there were a lot of questions that we got, and we were really hoping to take them up and throw them to the panelists, but because of the time constraint, we are unable to do that. But kindly keep sending your interventions on the chat room if you have not sent. And just like DG sir, I also it's difficult for us not to have heard from Dr. Rita as well as others. Over to you, sir, Rashmi sir, to kindly make the conclusion, and then we can finish.
Thank you, Shantanu. I think we have now come to the end of the webinar, and Dr. Mathur has so ably summed it up very succinctly. Ultimately, the sum and substance of this entire discussion appears to be that for green recovery or a green India in the future, the jobs are going to be critical, and we have to create green jobs in the future to be able to cater to the needs of sustenance as well as greening or taking care of the environmental requirements. And with this message, this paper which Shali has prepared, we will try to improve further by taking the inputs that we have received in this webinar, and we will do a better exercise and then come up with a final paper based on this discussion. So thank you once again, Shantanu, for co-chairing and leading this discussion. And thanks to the organizers, in particular Souvik and Shali from the TERI team, for having put it together so well. Thanks to Shantanu for your support.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, Shantanu.
Thank you,
everybody. Bye.
Thank you. We will end the meeting then. Thank you. All